July 8, 2026. 8:30 p.m. local time in Ankara, Turkey. That was 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. A catering truck pulled away from the side of the old Air Force One at Ankara's airport. According to multiple reports, President Donald Trump was inside it, being secretly moved to a different military aircraft because U.S. security officials were acting on a possible Iranian assassination threat. The public did not know. Many White House staff members and the journalists traveling with the president did not know. The plane that looked like it was carrying Trump soon took off without him. More than a month later, the newest details make the story more complicated. The Secret Service treated the danger seriously enough to carry out an extraordinary deception, but some U.S. intelligence officials reportedly had doubts about the intelligence behind it. Trump had spent July 8 at the NATO summit in Ankara as tensions with Iran were sharply escalating. The day before, the United States had resumed major strikes on Iran after a fragile ceasefire broke down. During meetings in Turkey, Trump repeatedly talked about Iranian threats against his life and said he had long been a top target. Then, his travel plans changed. At 3:42 p.m. local time, Trump posted that the newer presidential jet, the Boeing 747-8 gifted by Qatar and converted for presidential use, would fly ahead to RAF Mildenhall in England. He said he would use the older blue and white Air Force One for the trip from Turkey to Britain. Around 7:30 p.m., reporters asked whether the decision involved security concerns about Iran. Trump did not clearly confirm that. At 8:24 p.m., cameras showed him boarding the older Air Force One. But 6 minutes later, at 8:30, the catering truck pulled away. Reporting from the Washington Post, Reuters, and the Associated Press now says Trump had quietly left the aircraft through a door away from the main boarding area. He and a small group of aides were moved in the elevated catering container to a nearby Air Force C-32A, a smaller military jet based on the Boeing 757. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth also traveled on the smaller aircraft. Reuters reports that senior aides Dan Scavino, Natalie Harp, and Walt Nauta were among those who made the hidden transfer with Trump. The old Air Force One departed Ankara at 8:43 p.m. But Trump was not on it. Instead, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, White House staff members, and a 13-person press pool were aboard the aircraft that appeared to be carrying the president. That detail is now driving some of the biggest questions. A senior U.S. official told the Associated Press that Rubio knew about the switch and details of the threat. The official said Bessent was likely aware, but could not say for certain. Reuters, citing a person briefed on the incident, reports that the Secret Service considered the threat credible and imminent. Another source said there was not a clear operational plan for how hostile actors would carry out an attack, but there was enough concern about intent to force an immediate response. The reported threat involved the possibility that Air Force One could be targeted with a shoulder-fired missile. Reuters also says U.S. officials were alarmed by reporting that Iranians appeared to know where Trump was staying in Ankara, even down to the exact floor of his hotel. If accurate, that would mean officials were not simply dealing with a vague threat. They were confronting the possibility that hostile actors had unusually specific information about the president's movements. But this is where the story takes an important turn. The Washington Post reported Wednesday that the threat intelligence had been passed to the CIA by Israel, and that some U.S. intelligence officials viewed it with skepticism. One official described it as Israel-derived rather than generated by the United States, and said it was assessed with low confidence. That does not mean officials concluded the threat was fake. It means intelligence analysts apparently did not have the same level of confidence that the protective team ultimately acted on. Those are two different judgments. An intelligence agency may decide evidence is incomplete. The Secret Service has a different mission. When the possible consequence is an attack on the president, even uncertain intelligence can trigger drastic precautions. The White House has defended the decision, saying every measure is taken to protect Trump, including against threats from Iran. Trump himself confirmed the aircraft switch this week. Speaking to reporters at Joint Base Andrews, he said the decision was made by the Secret Service and the military and that he followed their instructions. He also argued that the smaller aircraft he used may actually have faced greater risk because an attacker might have expected him to switch planes. There is no public evidence proving that assessment. But once officials believe an adversary may know the president's normal travel pattern, every visible aircraft can become part of the deception. The C-32A carrying Trump flew from Ankara to RAF Mildenhall in Britain. The Washington Post reports that fighter jets escorted it. Meanwhile, the older Air Force One continued to Britain with officials, staff, and journalists aboard. Reporters were told to close their window shades, a request that struck some of them as unusual. When the aircraft reached Mildenhall, the deception continued. Trump was moved back into position, so cameras captured him descending from the old Air Force One at about 10:56 p.m. local time, creating the appearance that he had been on that aircraft during the flight from Turkey. Minutes later, at 11:01 p.m., he boarded the newer Qatari-provided presidential jet for the final trip to the United States. At the time, reporters still did not know what had happened. That secrecy is now creating a second debate. Presidents from both parties have traveled secretly to war zones, and deceptive travel arrangements have been used before. What is unusual here is the combination: a NATO ally, an alleged Iranian missile threat, a last-minute aircraft swap, a president hidden inside a catering truck, and senior officials and journalists left aboard the apparent decoy. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal has called for a congressional briefing. Senator Chris Van Hollen has also questioned whether the Israeli intelligence was independently verifiable. Congress could focus on two issues. First, how immediate was the threat? Second, how did officials decide who would remain on the apparent decoy aircraft? Rubio's presence adds another layer because he was reportedly briefed and is high in the presidential line of succession. But presidential protection is still more extensive than the security given to cabinet officials. There is also the newer Qatari-provided jet. Earlier reporting said it did not include all of the defensive countermeasures found on the older presidential aircraft. The White House has strongly defended the plane, saying it is secure and equipped for the presidential mission. Now Iran is responding publicly, at least through state media. On August 13, Iranian state television mocked the aircraft switch and portrayed it as evidence that Trump was afraid of Iran's military power. Tehran itself has not formally confirmed involvement in the alleged plot, and Iranian officials have not publicly taken responsibility for the threat described by U.S. sources. That distinction matters. The threat was serious enough for the Secret Service to move the president. But the public evidence still does not establish who, specifically, planned an attack, how far any plan had advanced, or whether anyone was actually in position to fire on Trump's aircraft that night. No missile was fired. Trump reached Britain safely. Everyone on the other aircraft also arrived safely, but the new reporting leaves questions that are not going away. How reliable was the intelligence? Why did different parts of the U.S. government appear to view it differently? Why were senior officials left on the plane being used as a decoy? And how much did the escalating U.S.-Iran conflict influence the decision to treat uncertain intelligence as an immediate danger? Congress may push for a classified briefing. The White House may face more questions about the threat assessment and the Qatari-provided aircraft. The Secret Service, however, is unlikely to reveal the most sensitive details of how it moved the president. What is already clear is that July 8 was far more unusual than the public was told at the time. For several hours, the United States projected one version of the president's location while the real operation was unfolding somewhere else. And now, the biggest unresolved question is not simply why Trump was moved. It is how close officials believed the threat really was, and whether the public will ever learn the full answer. What do you think? Was the Secret Service right to use an elaborate decoy operation despite uncertainty around the intelligence? Or do officials owe Congress and the public a fuller explanation of why so many people were kept in the dark?